Welcome to Live Electric Now. This is our second episode in a four-part series where we're going to talk everything EVs. I'm excited. I have a fantastic guest today. But before we get going, I want to say a special thank you to Rocky Mountain Power, to the GIVE Group, and to the Department of Energy's National Clean Cities Program for really making and allowing this podcast series to happen. I'm your host. My name is James Campbell. I'm the Director of Innovation and Sustainability Policy at Rocky Mountain Power. And behind the glass, we have Chris and Spencer. How you guys doing?
We're doing good. Fantastic.
Spencer, did you get any sleep yet?
No, I haven't had any sleep.
So Spencer has been making sure, working on getting all the lights back on everywhere in the Rocky Mountain region. So special thanks to Spencer and all the other employees at Rocky Mountain Power who's made sure we got lights put on after we've been dealing with the hurricane storms. So kudos to you guys. Really appreciate it. So this is our second episode. Today we're going to talk about buildings and transportation. You don't really think about buildings and EVs, but really there is a nexus between buildings and transportation. So it should be a really exciting episode, primarily because of our guests. I am super excited to really speak to. These are two individuals that, when you see somebody, you're like, when I grow up, I want to be like them. And I want to be like both of these guys. So I'm really excited to introduce it. First, we have Chris Parker, who is the executive director, the chairman, the grand poobah of the GIVE Group, who's also hosting us here today. Chris, how are you doing?
I'm doing all right. Thank you for the introduction. This should be fun.
And our other guest today is Hanko Kirchner, who's the CEO of PackSize and the co-founder of Leaders for Clean Air. How are you doing, Hanko?
Absolutely fantastic, and thank you for the invitation here.
Yeah, so these are both leaders, and so one of the things that is going to be unique, our first episode, we talked about the state of EVs, kind of battery chemistry, some of the environmental impacts. Today we're going to take a more of a kind of a business approach, and so we got really two CEOs and two leaders of organizations and how they're approaching electric vehicles, and from a building standpoint, one from a place of where you work in terms of Hanko and his workplace and how he's incorporating electric vehicles, and then the other with Chris, because he's a developer with residential multi-unit dwellings, and so where we live, so where we work and where we live. So Chris, tell us about the GIVE Group, and tell us about this incredible location where we're broadcasting from.
Oh, sure, I appreciate that. So GIVE is a hybrid nonprofit for-profit group. We go into blighted or transitional neighborhoods that are about to gentrify and try to find a little bit of balance in there. So if an area is about to get overheated, we provide affordable or mixed income housing in that area, art support, creative support, entrepreneurial support for types and categories of people who are often displaced with all of that greatness that happens when an area renews. And then our nonprofit side really seeks to look at overall systemic issues that can be addressed in the built environment and see how we might build prototypes that can really attack those going forward, which kind of takes us to this building. Project Open is a demonstration of being able to build all electric emission-free buildings at a price point that actually is less expensive to build than what the traditional kind of dual fuel system is currently taking over the market. That's very important for Utah and really anywhere right now. Because if you really want clean air and you want to have a stable fuel source that isn't dependent on nat gas going to your building, having electricity, have no emissions in your air shed, but also be able to be generated by a host of different fuel sources in a power outage or in a market instability, really made it the right choice for this building. So this structure will be 250 units, 200 of which are already built, of mixed income housing that we actually got more units because of making all electric, and it actually gets all of its power sourcage from a solar field down in southern Utah, which has far greater solar exposure than we could ever get here, through a partnership with Rocky Mountain Power. So theoretically, this building emits nothing and actually was able to provide more housing to those people who needed it because it emits nothing.
Isn't that one of the challenges of high-density housing? You don't have enough rooftop space to be able to really self-generate, that you really have to go into these more community-scale type of solar farms or renewable energy.
No, that's exactly right. You have two competing issues in urban development. One is, the ecological impact of sprawl generally, and that's driven by very low densities. So you have, on one hand, you want to be able to build high. That's the solution to really long-term economic viability of cities, but also ecologically having more of your land for the forests and things we love to recreate in, and less of your land in asphalt. To do that, you need to go up, but the area of rooftop of your high building usually can't support the load of energy generation that it needs to support the entire kind of usage of it. And that's really where the utility has to come in. You have to be able to generate those, kind of those kilowatts in a way that doesn't require you to have cities that are 2 stories tall. Because there's a whole host of issues there, especially when you're building something like housing. Regardless of whether or not you're building for the top of market, middle market, or especially the lower market, you don't want to have a developer or even a community make a decision between, do we want more affordable units or do we want zero emission buildings? You've got to find a solution that gets you both, and then you can start building cities that are great to be in.
Yeah, so if I was to move in to this building, I truly could have a zero carbon footprint then if I actually lived here.
No, absolutely. And, apart from it just being an all electric building, it also has, many car chargers, over 40 or 50 car chargers. So as electric vehicles take over the next 5 or 10 years, however long you think that period is, this building won't become obsolete. Someone doesn't have to choose between an affordable place to live and driving a vehicle that is more affordable to run, but also doesn't pollute. So you could have literally your house produce no emissions, your car, which is also solar powered, produce no emissions, and with a lot of the other amenities with food and access that we're putting into the structure, you could have more or less, a carbon neutral life, or at least as close to that as you can in our current economy.
Yeah, what I really like about your approach is that when you were building this complex, you were thinking in that future, even though right now, today with EVs, we're only at that 2% or so level of adoption, but you actually pre-wired all of the parking spots in the parking garage of the building to be capable to handle the EVs.
It's been interesting too, because they say you build it and they'll come. We've actually had 4 people, which doesn't sound like a lot, but over the course of 1 year, people who already owned vehicles when they moved in, 4 people have transitioned to electric vehicles because we provide the power as well. Your fuel effectively becomes free. We do that because it's a cleaner way for us to live, basically. But they've done the math in their head, and it made far more sense for them to convert to an electric vehicle, the lower maintenance cost, the lower fuel cost, which is huge, especially on a moderate income kind of level. The second biggest expense for someone who makes under $25 an hour is transportation typically. And it's also the dirtiest. So if you can go ahead and take that transportation bill and make it more regular with the lower maintenance payments that EVs are typically known for, but also the fuel, not only it being free in our case, but anywhere, the stability of fuel prices, because again, it's coming off a grid that could have multi-sources, really makes a big difference if you're micromanaging a small budget. It's a huge benefit to our residents, and we've been really pleased to see how many are taking us up on it.
Yeah, and that's an important aspect, is being able to charge and have the ability to charge at home. If you're in a single family house, that's pretty easy to do, but if you're in an apartment complex, it's a little challenging. Mm-hmm. And the data is really clear that most charging, over 90% of charging, occurs either at home or at the workplace, which I want to bring in Hanko on that, because you've done such amazing stuff with workplace charging and being one of the co-founders of Leaders for Clean Air. But before we get into Leaders for Clean Air, tell us about pack size, because that I have to say, especially where we're at today, is, as a business and what you're doing, is just so, I think, important for us as a society to address sustainability and for us really moving forward. So tell us about your company.
So we are absolutely a for-profit company, and that might be the one of the differentiators. But maybe also with the non-profit mission. Our mission is smart packaging for a healthy planet, and the word healthy is incredibly important to us. But we are absolutely in the for-profit arena. I always describe pack size from the perspective of, do you order online? Do you both order online?
Unfortunately, my wife orders quite a bit online.
And you probably order more online today than you ever have.
Yeah.
Then let's go through your experience. You receive the products at home, right? So you have an unpacking experience first. Usually, what do you find? Does the package ever fit? Have you ever received a package that truly perfectly fits?
No.
Okay.
My kids love jumping on the blow, popping the popcorn and peanuts and stuff in there. Yeah.
That's exactly
I like
right.
that too.
That's exactly right. And that is the essence of what pack size fixes. Pack size provides on-demand packaging. We make the boxes or the envelopes or the pouches right at the pack stations of our customers. So when you order online, we're actually looking at what you're placing into your shopping cart. When you check out of the online internet ordering experience, our software is already calculating what box size, what envelope or pouch is perfect for your order. And then when your order is ready to ship, it could be one item, could be multiple items, our hardware and software actually produces the perfect sized package right at the door, at the outbound door of the internet retailer of your choice. And so if your favorite internet retail company uses our technology, you would not be receiving oversized packaging. Just to give you an example of how impactful that actually is, there are 24 million truckloads in the US alone every year.
Wow.
That are necessary to ship all this unnecessary volume of air or unnecessary shipping volume, 24 million truckloads. They're burning 1.7 billion gallons of diesel, leaving pollution in the air, and that triggers 17 billion kilograms of CO2.
So the issue isn't the weight of the packaging, the issue is the space.
It's the volume, because trucks and airplanes and delivery vans, they weigh out, they cube out before they weigh out. And so that is why we could actually fit 66% more parcels on the same truck, on the same plane, and now think of the packaging itself, also the paper, the corrugated, the paper that is necessary. Guess how many trees are actually necessary to make all this unnecessary corrugated that we only need because the bag boxes are too large? How many millions of trees every year do you think the US economy is consuming that is completely unnecessary? I give you a hint, it's between 50 and 100 million.
Oh wow, I was going to say 2 million.
2 million, okay. But Chris, what would you say?
Well, you said millions, which already was above what I would have guessed. So that's huge.
No, it's actually 98 million trees are cut down and converted into paper so that the boxes can be too large by 40%. 40%. So that is what we fix at pack size. But when I came to the United States, I'm originally from Germany, I didn't want to just start a business that is like any other business, that is ordinary, that is for profit, but then creates a lot of pollution as we conduct our business. And so not only is our solution incredibly sustainable and clean, but also as we conduct our own business, how do we show up at our customers? When our technicians and engineers visit our installations at all these different fulfillment centers and factories, how do we show up? Do we show up with zero emission? Or do we show up leaving a lot of pollution in the air? When we transport the corrugated, the buildings that we run here in the United States and also in the other 26 countries that we are in, are we leaving pollution in the air? Are we conducting our business, creating a cost for society? That was always my biggest concern. And I wanted to create a company that has a bottom line where you subtract the cost to society before you judge whether or not you actually made a profit. And so from a bookkeeping perspective, that's how I look at it. We have our bottom line, but then we have to subtract the cost to the society, and only then I can judge, was I a good entrepreneur? And that is where all this electricity comes in, because electricity can be generated renewably without any emissions at all. And that is when we created together, James, with your help also, Utah's largest workplace recharging campus. Because my vision always was that I wanted to have our associates and team members come to work and feel good about the commute, first of all, but then also feel good about connecting to the facility, to the real estate. Just like Chris, as you described, you're actually connecting to a free source of energy. And that is so cool when you drive up to Paxize, to our facility here. You actually connect, you plug in, you get zero emission. First of all, you showed up with zero emission, but then you also have zero cost. So, and then while you're working, you're recharging for free outside. And then we took the next step, which was to also get the building itself zero emission, and that heat pumps, exactly as you were describing here for your residential projects, also in the business environment, that is one of the biggest drivers of pollution.
Well, I mean, it goes back to this relationship that the buildings is not separated from the broader society and from transportation, but also just from the total emissions that happen in a community. And one of the things that, Chris, you had mentioned that I always thought was, that I really enjoy about this building in particular, was the notion of putting in food in the building and the food deserts that we have, because it's kind of that same problem. It's like, well, how do you go and get food? And so tell us about your shop that you have out here, the food store that's available to the residents.
Yeah, sure thing. I mean, not to directly try to outsource your business model or end it, but this food joint we have in the front basically looks at, you know, the downside of a direct-to-consumer or online ordering process, or really anything you might go to the grocery store for. And that's, you've got great food, but you have this package it comes in. And increasingly that package is almost as big as what's coming in it, as you mentioned. And so that actually is a bulk food, but also an individual food place that'll go ahead and serve you anything you might need for dinner tonight. But it'll do it with you bringing your own container, or it'll bring a reusable container that has no plastics whatsoever in it. We've got a restaurant that'll be starting in about 6 months, half a block away, same concept. Go ahead, dish out what you want, take it home. And then we've got another facility a little bit less than 2 miles from here, that will have kind of a Blue Apron style meal, if you will, with none of the packaging associated with that brand. The convenience is great, and I think it's where the market's going to go regardless. So if you can kind of tilt that market to not be deeply detrimental to our economy and our ecology, then I think you've done it better. And what we've found is that people's diets are changing relative to what is convenient for them. The last time I went to McDonald's, it was not because I made a life plan that put me at McDonald's at 5 p.m. on a Tuesday. I was hungry.
Supersizing for
No. This is not something that's on my big goal list. But the reason I ended up there is convenience. You were hungry because the day was stressful. If you can make the most convenient option also a healthy option, and then make it something that doesn't.
Well, it's funny with my kids. I haven't gone to a fast food until I had kids, and you would think, well, I don't want to get them, but when they need to eat, you want to go right away, and then looking for that healthy option, it's like, okay, is there what's available? So having that's great.
Yeah, if you can make life a downhill trot to better health and better ecological outcomes, then it will happen. If you have to be a Puritan in order to green your society or to eat better food, it's just that much more. There's so much energy humans have in a day, and the reality is we spend it everywhere. One more thing that takes a lot of energy, maybe it gets done sometimes, the likelihood is it's not getting done much. So if you can go ahead and make just the convenience that modern day life demands something that points you in the direction of a good outcome, then you can really expect people to do it. Otherwise, it's kind of hoping in vain.
But you made a comment about something about changes that are happening in society today. And one of those is the delivery of goods. It's almost like we're kind of shifting this kind of COVID, how it's really impacted society. A lot of the vehicles now that are on the roads aren't necessarily moving people, they're actually moving goods to people. And this notion of shopping, my wife won't go shopping anymore, and so with Instacart and all these other services, it's so much easier. I was reading that before COVID, 2% of groceries were online purchases and delivered. Today it's 20%. So Hanko, how do you see that kind of changing this kind of notion with the shift in society and how that's impacting you?
Yeah, I actually think that the shift that just happened here in the last half year, I don't see that reversing. I see that as an acceleration of something that would have happened anyway, and now it's just happening much faster. And I don't think that we're going to go away from having more and more goods or food delivered directly to our homes. And we want to be part of the solution to make that as efficient as one can possibly make it. And so I think we just took a quantum leap into that direction, and we don't see this reversing. So internet retailing, and you can read the statistics with regards to where credit card money is being spent. And when you read that, you see that internet retailing is still up by roughly 2x compared to earlier this year. And you're not seeing that coming down right now. So we basically took a step up, and we keep moving up from there.
Yeah.
That is.
Well, one of the things that's interesting from an air quality standpoint is that, right, if people aren't driving as much because they're not going to the goods and services, but rather they're coming to them, the types of vehicles are shifting from passenger vehicles, which are, even an internal combustion engine today, a brand new one isn't as polluting from a criterion pollutants. It is polluting from a CO2 standpoint. That is still emitting, but at least from your criterion pollutants, it's not as bad. But trucks, though, don't follow the same air quality standards that passenger vehicles. And so as we're shifting to more trucks moving goods around, we're actually increasing the amount of pollutants, both in terms of, PM 2.5 and NOx and SOx and that stuff, but that increase, but also an increase in CO2 because they're not as fuel efficient. And so I like that your business is trying to address the packaging side, but what are your thoughts on the actual, the truck side? And
yeah, I think we have to differentiate there between the long haul and the last mile. The last mile is the biggest challenge of the internet retail industry right now. But the last mile is also most easily electrifiable, and we see this by Amazon ordering, I forgot now how many, but they ordered maybe 7,000 electric delivery.
200,000.
200,000.
Yeah.
And on the long haul, will probably take a lot longer to be zero emission there, but even there we have solutions on the horizon. Now the long haul happens anyway, because the supply chain, the way it works is you still have the long haul to the retail store. And let's take the Walmarts or the big retailers, their supply chains are set up with long hauls. And so internet retail does not increase the number of long hauls in total. Because if you have an internet retail long haul, that replaces a long haul that would have gone to the retail store. And now it goes to the fulfillment center instead.
Yeah.
So you still have probably a similar amount of miles being driven by the not so clean long haul semi-trucks. But the last mile from the fulfillment center to the doorstep, that will be electric in a very short number of years, I think. And then overall, I think we'll be looking at a more efficient supply chain overall.
Yeah. So as we're on that theme of efficient supply chains, Chris, I remember you and I were talking about as you're looking at how you're designing your buildings. Why don't you talk about some of the efficiencies that you're looking at when you're designing your new buildings and how to, because one of the biggest, right, from an emission standpoint, you're doing the right thing in electrifying the parking lot to enable the transportation to electrify. But talk about some of the things you're doing with the other aspects of your buildings, like with water and some of the other design aspects.
Sure. First step is to, once you build it, not have it pollute. Especially for Utah's air problems, that's step one. Do not emit in your own airshed. There's something about, emitting where you live that you're not supposed to do.
Yeah.
The second thing, though, is how could the actual construction of a building not be a fairly detrimental force to the ecology of a surrounding neighborhood? And right now it is. You get to put a net zero badge on your building, but you might have a massive ecological footprint when you put in the concrete, when you put in the rock, when you put in whatever else. And so GIV's really trying to look at buildings that are far more efficient to run, but also far more efficient to build. So our next building will be a modular prototype that uses sustainably harvested wood in large masses. It'll be the first kind of tall wood building in Utah under the new CLT code. And our target is actually to have...
Explain what that is.
So cross-laminated timber is something that very recently got approved in the United States. It's been fairly normalized in many parts of Europe for a long time, but there's actually an interesting gap in the development community really across the US right now, in that you are seeing a huge amount of 4- and 5-story buildings all over everywhere. And the reason for that is our code allows that to be built in wood. And there's a huge increase if you go to concrete or a steel building. But high-rise code, which is where your real expenses come, lets you go 8 stories. It's just wood can't do that yet. So a bunch of really smart people figured out that if you cross-laminate, which is basically taking a bunch of 2x4s in one direction and gluing them to a bunch of 2x4s in another direction, and doing that can actually be as strong or stronger than steel if you laminate them in a certain way. And what that does is it makes it so the entirety of your building can actually be a carbon suck rather than something that emits carbons. These trees take in carbon their entire lifetimes, and as long as you don't burn them, if you put them in a building, you actually have a negative carbon impact from them getting to you if it's from a sustainable forest. So if your whole building is built out of that, you might have it be great that a building next to you got built, rather than kind of pretending like whatever happened didn't happen and going forward. So GIV buildings are really trying to target a net zero install going forward, rather than just a net zero continuation. And then we're really interested in how you can take traditional HVAC systems and change them. We mentioned heat pumps a little bit earlier in the building. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but right now, multifamily buildings are designed and built in the United States as if you had 100 different homes that are just stuck together. Everyone's got their own HVAC system. Everyone's got their own emittance system. It's fairly inefficient. The only difference from a multifamily building and a single family building is there's no sidewall. If you can go ahead and start thinking of your HVAC system as more of a circulatory system, that goes ahead and uses heat pumps on the main level and distributes that through a building. And you can find a way to do that without using a very expensive, traditional 4-pipe system, or some of these kind of higher end things you might see in a heavy commercial building. If you can find a way where that's the same cost, then our current metrics are suggesting you can have 40% shaving off of your entire operation cost, but you also could do about a 30% savings of your install cost. And that's really what it's going to take. You can be mad at the building industry in the US for being as ecologically uncaring. It might be one way of putting it. But if you're trying to develop something in today's really expensive building environment, your choice is to do a project or not to do a project. It isn't to do a green one or not. That you just don't have the margins. So if we really want to see Utah, the West, the nation go ahead and move to these far more efficient systems, you have to figure out a way where the economic incentive aligns with the environmental incentive. So that's kind of our next buildings. You kind of bank the winnings of, hey, we can make it so these don't emit in the long term. If we can show the industry how they can get more units, or a yacht, if that's their thing, by doing the ecologically impactful thing to do, we think he'll be following. And then you don't have that kind of sticky situation of, do you build more units of affordable housing, or do you build a green building? As long as those are divergent, you have a muddy situation that allows people to just do what's easiest and what's cheapest.
And what they know.
Exactly. Well, and rightfully so. I mean, buildings are at least 50-year decisions.
Yeah.
You don't want to find out in year 3 that you did the wrong HVAC system and not be able to replace it. And so I think the horribly frustrating inertia of the construction industry is also well-founded.
Yeah. So you talk about the HVAC system. What do you think of Tesla's Octavalve? And so for those of you that aren't familiar, in the new Model Y, they have a heat pump. Tesla's designed a heat pump to help heat the car in the winter, and it's supposed to be incredibly efficient. I don't know if you've read anything about it, but I've heard some suggestions that they're eventually going to take that small heat pump and enlarge it and put it into buildings. That's part of their kind of their master plan.
Right, just crossing our fingers for that day. I mean, you can talk about this as well as I could. We're really excited about anything that more efficiently transfers heat in an environment. Because if you transfer it, you're not spending much energy doing it. If you're creating it, there's only so much you can do. And especially in a battery-powered car, taking 10% of your range or 15% of your range to heat your car on a cold day is the difference between you being able to have this be your only vehicle sometimes and having to have it be a second vehicle.
Well, and also one of the things that's interesting with the relationship with the car and the building is can the vehicle eventually provide that energy in the back and forth, and that's that vehicle to grid. It's not an issue here in the West because we have air conditioning, so most buildings have a big peak in the summer, so the utility has to build out and provide the capacity to meet that peak in the summer. So it's pretty easy then to supply power to vehicles when outside of that peak. So as long as you don't charge during peak times or in other times of the year, there's plenty of capacity today. But in communities where they don't have that, like in the UK, it's really interesting. They don't have air conditioning. Buildings aren't built that way. So their electrical system is actually built out. So now that they're introducing vehicles into their grid, they can't. They don't have the capacity to do that. They're actually looking at their homes by bringing in cars, doubling the use at a home. So they have to find 100% increase in their load. And so they're really exploring this vehicle to grid as an ability to manage that thing. So what are your thoughts on that?
Battery backup is something that our buildings going forward will have, and even to the extent of when you pull off the grid from an environmental standpoint matters, right? Sometimes during the day, you're gonna have more solar or more wind than you need. If you can find a way where your building aligns with the natural cycle of energy production, even in a good time, you could go ahead and have a much cleaner building. But the battery, for a single family home or even a multifamily building like Open that has 50 plus cars sitting there, if you have a once in a century event, which we had last week and seem to be having every other month now, the difference between a neighborhood having heat or a neighborhood having all of their food spoiled, which doesn't sound like a huge idea, but if that's a substantial chunk of your income, losing 2 weeks worth of groceries is a big deal. If your car could just sit there and kick in for that 3, 4, 5 hours, or even, if you leave the car there, you can run a fridge for a long time on an electric vehicle. The safety of a community is radically enhanced by having that two-way system instead of it just going one way.
Yeah. Well, not only in the buildings where you live, but also the buildings where you work. And Hanka, I remember, what was it, 4 years ago, when you and I kind of sat down and we were plotting how do we bring EV infrastructure into the valley, into the state. It was kind of fun. I remember going to your building, and you were Honka was actually one of the first to do this, to actually put charging, make it available to the employees. And I remember you were so excited. We sat down and you were showing me the graph, the plot of what happens when everybody shows up to work, and it plots in and it goes up. So talk about it when everybody plugs in. So tell us about that.
It's really interesting to learn these new behaviors, but also how they impact the grid or the consumption, in this case, of electricity. I experimented with all of these things and behaviors privately first. So I have battery backup at our home. We got solar. We got the chargers at home, and then when it works there, then I move it into the business. And so it was at that point in time where we began putting up more charging stations, because I began to see that EV transportation is going to be the future. Once you have experienced electric transportation, I don't see how anyone would ever go back. It is so much fun. For me, driving to work today is an event. In the past, it was always like, okay, I need to be in my Prius, there's no torque, and I'm driving to work, and everything is ordinary. but now driving to work is actually an event. And when I began to experience that, because you have the torque, you feel good about, you're not polluting the air, leaving behind yourself, it's just fun. And then you want to show up at work at a modern workplace where you can really truly connect to the building. But then when everyone does the same at the same time, and in the case of PackSize, we start at 8 in the morning, and if everyone plugs in, and by the way, we are now at 35% adoption of employees actually using zero-emission transportation, actually showing up with an electric car. That is why we needed 53 chargers. So Chris, you're totally right. You said that I'm putting out these chargers and then people adopt. And then you shared with us how many people have actually adopted zero-emission transportation as a result of you taking the lead and putting up these chargers. But then we found out that we have this peak in demand. And so now the next thing we need to find out is how do we map that to when the sun shines? Because I think from your perspective, James, you probably want to also level the grid as much as you can. And then when people go back home, you don't want people to plug in and charging at home when the air conditioner is on, right? Because now you have double the demand.
I want you and customers to use a lot of electricity, but the same amount.
All at the same time, exactly. No, and I think that is all achievable. They are now the new chargers, and especially if we talk about Tesla. So you can actually, they're all networked together. They're very low cost, and other manufacturers will follow that.
Yeah.
And then actually what we will do at PackSize now is that we will actually create a ceiling of demand so that we can stretch it more throughout the day, because when people are parked for 8 hours at work, for instance, you don't need to have a fast charging speed. You just need to make sure that they get home.
Exactly. And one of the things that really, because of your company as a laboratory, what you were able to demonstrate was that as everybody shows up to work and they plug in, but not everybody shows up at the same time,
right.
But that really it's about 9:30, by that time everybody's there, and then you get this peak draw, about this peaking at about 10 o'clock in the morning, and then then it kind of starts dying off, and it peaks again at 1 o'clock because they go to lunch and then they plug back in. But what was really great to find out was that by 3 o'clock it was done.
Yeah.
And which is really about the start of our system peak. And so it was really interesting to know that these workplace chargers aren't going to have a negative impact, at least on the broader system grid. And then we actually did, as part of our Westsmart EV project, we worked with the University of Utah, who did some modeling and did some work and studied the charging at PackSize. And what we found was a couple of things were interesting, I would say. One was the solar panels that you had was able to bring down that 10 o'clock peak just a little bit. It was able to help out. But the other thing that was interesting too was that when you have free charging at work, people don't charge at home, they're going to charge at work. So everybody was showing up to work with an empty battery.
Completely empty. I would actually say timed so that it's like maximum free electricity.
Yeah, but the good thing about that was that when they come home, they don't have to plug in at the system peak at 6 p.m. in the evening. And so there was a lot of benefits with this workplace charging. So tell us about Leaders for Clean Air. Speaking of workplace charging, tell us about that program that you've developed.
Yeah, that actually started with me actually developing asthma upon moving here. So I like running, and I was not aware of the air quality problem that we had. And so it was a little bit of a personal journey also, where I developed asthma out of nowhere. But I also went running even on bad air days, because to me it looked like fog, not smog. In Germany we have fog, and then it looks a little bit hazy, and so to me I wasn't educated enough. So I went to the doctor. He said, "Oh yeah, you got asthma. There are a few pills you can take, and that will take care of it." And I'm like, wait a second. Now taking a pill, because I need to find out what actually triggered it. And that's when I embarked into a personal educational journey to study this air quality problem. And it actually turned out that there was always the correlation. When the air was bad, I had asthma, but when the air was not bad, I was symptom-free. And then I learned that actually the whole society is impacted by that. And so I said, okay, do we really have to live with this problem? And then coming from the for-profit business perspective, again, also pack size is growing rapidly. We need to attract talent from outside of the state, and we were finding candidates in other parts of the country who then, when they did the research, they said, no, I'm not moving my family in there. So we were actually missing out on a big business opportunity also to grow faster, to bring in the right talent. And it was at that point when I studied the sources of the pollution. And it really came down to two things. Mobile sources, cars and trucks, basically making up 50%, and then buildings ejecting 40%, and then 10% was industry, mining and refining. And so when I looked at that, I thought, okay, as a business person, you always also have to focus. And so what can you actually tackle? And that is when we said, it is actually mobile sources. We have a solution. They're fun to use. Electric cars are fun. And of course, passengers' cars come first, and then pickup trucks. And then ultimately, vans and delivery and semi-trucks will come also. And that was basically my personal journey, to not sit there and complain all day long, but also look, we are all part of this problem. This is a collective behavioral challenge, basically. We all contribute to it, everyone just a little bit, but when you add up all of the little bits, you come up with a gigantic problem. And so I decided we need to fix this. So my vision then became that we can create a non-profit business model that takes support from stakeholders. And we get donations, and Rocky Mountain Power is a fantastic supporter. And that is, James, when we met, and I said, James, we're doing this nonprofit thing, but you guys are going to be the bigger winner out of this, because all of the energy that is dispensed through the chargers, that will come ultimately from Rocky Mountain Power. And so we designed this collaborative program where we have now placed, this year alone, we'll be at 600 chargers that will be placed through this program. And ultimately, we will need about 160,000 chargers in the valley here. This is the mathematical number that we need, 160,000, so that the total amount of electricity can be dispensed to replace 100% of the gasoline and also diesel. So 160,000 is the benchmark, and then when you do the math, that would cost about $60 to $70 million at today's cost of the chargers. Of course, there's some installation costs. I'm only talking about the cost of the infrastructure itself now, but $60 to $70 million to change an entire state almost. That sounds like a bargain to me. And that is basically what we did as a nonprofit to begin fixing it, not to sit there and complain.
Yeah, to find the solutions and find it from a business perspective, and to work with businesses that want to do it, and really hats off to the organization, because and I know our partnership has really been quite successful, and we've together have installed about 1,600 level 2 chargers to date in businesses across the valley here, and so it's been really exciting how effective that is. But what's interesting is, and that addresses the commuters.
Yeah.
Those folks that have commuters. But how do we address for those, Chris, who want to live in your building, and they want to live downtown, they work downtown, maybe they don't want to have a car? How can we do that where you can, be emissions free, not have to really address with the car? And so when we met, what was that, a few years ago, and we sat down, like, well, why don't we do an electric car share?
Sure.
And how can we do that? How can we do that? So talk about that. Talk about your ideas with electric car shares.
No, I think electric car sharing is probably going to happen in 5 or 10 years, regardless of any kind of nascent view. It doesn't make a lot of sense to have a car sit for 8 hours at work or sit for 8 hours at home and not do much in between. And these are very expensive assets. Usually people, if you don't own your home, it is your most expensive asset, most likely, in case you're really into mountain biking.
Yeah, a car sits 95% of the time. It only is in motion 5%.
So how does that make sense, right? I mean, that you have so much money literally sitting, getting burnt, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So we went ahead and piloted, and prior to COVID, it was doing pretty well, where we kind of put the brakes on it. Okay, let's not share a steering wheel until we know what the virus really looks like. But we found a lot of people very curious, and a lot of people using it as we saw a lot of second cars go away. And then we saw a lot of people just kind of waiting until the range extended a little bit further to have their primary car away. But in a world where you can have an ease of car share that is allowed by it being an electric vehicle, because the problem with Zipcar or other ones that have been in this industry for a long time is they have to charge a lot for a few different reasons. Number one, they've got to have somebody who goes in there and fuels the car, or they have to ask their consumer to fuel the car, which they then have to pay the consumer to do. So the economics of it means that overall price point has to be $10 an hour to use, which for once a week, twice a week works. If that's your main mode of transportation, though, that's not going to be an economically intelligent thing for you to do. Electric car charging, especially if a building like ours is providing it, the fuel is there.
Yeah.
And if you create an app or part of the creation of an app, which we were lucky enough to partner with a group called Envoy to do that, your car share is done when you plug it in. So I don't have to worry about how the condition of the vehicle is when you leave it. On your app, you can see how much the charge is on any given vehicle, so you're not stuck with something with a quarter tank of fuel. I really think that's going to be something that takes over the market.
Yeah, no, and I think that's just great of connecting the car share not to a random location throughout that how do you get to that location to get the car, but connect the vehicle to the building to where you actually live. And now you can do into that and talk about some of the ideas that we have moving forward with how to utilize these vehicles that, because that's going back to that fundamental challenge of these are assets that are sitting, how can we now use it for not just commuting or for running chores or errands, but can this actually be a source that some of your residents actually can make a little income?
No, exactly. I mean, 20 years from now, if Tesla does what they're going to say, or other people that are going in the autonomous driving field, you'll just have extremely cheap transportation, and that'll be the way of it. I've got a $2 click on my phone, it's going to take me wherever. Because without the driver, I think Uber has something like 75% of its overall cost is the driver itself. So if your vehicle lasts a lot longer, it's not going to depreciate as quickly, especially if you get these 500,000 or million-mile batteries, and then your fuel source is a lot cheaper. But in between those two times, humans are going to need to drive these cars. And what you find is that if the cost of the vehicle, again, maintenance goes down and fuel goes down, people can make a little bit more money on that. The average Uber driver, makes enough to continue doing it. But if they don't have to pay for those costs, or if an entity that can get relatively inexpensive financing or simply has a cash reserve laying around can go ahead and purchase some of these vehicles, there's an initiative we'll be launching where basically you'll have in exchange for you using the vehicle, you do 2 or 3 hours of Ubering. And now your cost of transportation is virtually none, but you get to trade an hour, which you might have in abundance at a lower and middle income kind of price bracket. And you don't have to worry at all about a car. Plus you've got one that'll last long, that you don't have to worry about maintaining, that you don't have to worry if someone else left a scratch on it. It's a far more egalitarian way of transporting the community, and also can be a real moneymaker for someone who has an extra couple hours in a day, or for some level of disability only has those hours to work. We have several people in many of our buildings who simply can't stay in a working position, for lack of a better word, for 8 hours. They have either mental impediments to that or physical impediments to that. So an entire workforce, if your kids are going to school for 4 hours, it's tough for you to go and find a 4-hour job. If you're someone who has to be asleep for every 3 or 4 hours, which surprisingly is more people than I thought it would be, now you have a job where you can actually make a few dollars in an environmentally sustainable way by taking polluting cars off of the grid, and it's right there at home. So we're really excited about programs that will kind of push that in the future, to kind of be the bridge between where we think everything's going, which is cars just drive themselves and pick you up at a whim. In the meantime, let's get money into people's hands that can really use it, and then let's make them electric vehicles that are doing this.
Yeah, well, and also, you're now sharing the cost of that vehicle across multiple people, instead of having just one person bear the insurance costs, the maintenance costs, the fuel costs. Now you can share that across multiple people. And so I am really excited. So we're going to Chris and I, we're going to partner on a new project starting this coming next year. Should be pretty exciting to where we're going to offer up really get some vehicles to expand it, to really get some of the residents here, to give them this opportunity to go in and do some ride sharing, ride hailing, and make a little money on the side, and see if it's a model that can work out. And you made one of the, we've been partnering with Lyft, and one of the things that we've found in some of the data is that most of the drivers are not full-time drivers. There's some that's actually what they do, but most it is this part-time gig, and so having this program should be pretty exciting,
Absolutely.
and I'm looking forward to that. So we're going to have electric vehicles connected to the buildings that residents can now utilize. Let's talk about other types of vehicles that are connected to workplace buildings, and that's fleet vehicles. And so Hanko, talk us about some of your fleet vehicles and some of your vision and what you're doing.
I can honestly say that we have bought our last combustion engine car, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago. And my vision has always been, from the founding moment of the company, is that when we show up at a customer, we need to be able to say, we showed up with the least amount of pollution possible. And that's just a company principle. And we need to be able to tell the customer and look the customer in the eye and say, that's what I did. So that's why 2 or 3 years ago, the ranges became long enough to where, and then you guys helped us out also with getting the first few cars into the fleet, of course, but whether it's an engineer showing up at a customer or a salesperson or anyone, now moving forward, it needs to be zero emission. And we are now at a point where, it's primarily the Tesla, that when you look at a sales force that is all over the country, the distances are long. So the recharging network, the supercharger network, actually becomes all of a sudden very important. If I just do my commutes, then I don't need the superchargers.
Well, and by using these Teslas, right, you're not you don't depreciate as much, so it keeps the value, and you can put so many miles and it has the range. It's an economic decision.
It is, and so, but not everyone views it that way. And so the marching order that we gave our team members, those few that got the car at first, and now we are ordering more now. And at the moment, it is only the Tesla that actually is usable from a going-to-market perspective in a professional way, without losing a lot of time, like getting stranded without range or waiting at the hotel for 8 hours before I can take off again. The supercharger network is key. But so we have now done the first 2 or 3 years, and we are not buying any more combustion engines.
It's interesting you talk about that the supercharger network is key. So when we did the initial data on our Westsmart EV project, when we put in the fast chargers along I-15, and what we found was that, kind of what we said earlier, most commuters charge at home or work. Mm-hmm. And those are level 2 chargers, which have a low impact on the grid. It's the cheapest way to charge, especially since the car is sitting 95% of the time. That makes sense. But for fleet vehicles and work vehicles, they don't sit 95% of the time. They actually...
Well, they're driving. And back to the cost, I remember that the very first salespeople we told, park in the back of the parking lot, don't drive up to the front door. This is the wrong image. People think we're making too much money, and the education level just isn't there. So we told them, always park in the back, and then walk over to the entrance door, and just keep a low profile. But here was the math, and we actually equipped the salespeople to also articulate this to the customers should it come up. 500,000 miles is currently the assumed battery lifetime.
Yeah.
They will go up to 1 million, but right now the chassis and the car itself is built for 1 million miles. And then at 500,000 roughly, you need to buy a new battery. So we did the math. I asked our finance team, tell me, is this truly the most economical way of doing it? And the numbers came back. I think we're now down to 6 cents per mile plus the electricity. So 6 cents per mile, you can't beat that. That is crazy. No other car can compete. So we're actually the lowest cost.
It's funny you say that, because we had some engineers at our power plants, because we were looking to, we actually as an organization put in a new policy that moving forward, all vehicles will become electric, and we have by next year that all new purchases of passenger vehicles must be electric. That's just, so those curmudgeons don't want to drive, they got to drive it. And then it was funny, I got some engineer did some calculations, he was trying to say, it's economic, we need to get Teslas and drive.
It sounds crazy, doesn't it?
I know.
Because they did such.
I didn't have the courage to try to sell that to my management, though.
That's my finance department. And then they came back to me and gave me the green light.
No, that's great. Yeah. But it is interesting that how you talk about that with the miles per road, that from a fleet aspect, and also even from the ride sharing as well, it can last so long. I mean, that's why actually Tesla, if you look at now, if you actually lease a Tesla, you cannot buy the car at the end of the lease, because they're going to take that vehicle and put it into their ride hailing company that they're going to develop. And so, which is actually really smart. Now, whoever leases it is basically paying that car out, most of it, but the car is still functional afterward. You can even swap out the seats or whatever, and it would still, but the foundational drivetrain and battery will still work quite a bit beyond the lease. So it's.
I think cost per mile is really the only way to look at it. And oftentimes, purchasing departments take the investment cost, the upfront, and then they do a price purchase variance on that one.
Yeah.
But you have to look at it over the lifetime of the car. And I'm okay with that if you have a fleet, especially when it's a car that gets better over time, and we believe that that's the case for the Tesla because new software comes in, so you're not locked into the status of the technology when you buy it. And so that's why I'm okay to look at it over a very long period of time. I believe that fleet that we are now building up, and we are now swapping out the Priuses and the other hybrid cars. We're swapping them out. I believe that that's going to be a very long-lived fleet.
So, Chris, Cybertruck, love it or hate it?
I love what it is. I don't necessarily love how it is. We're in the same boat. We have both a for-profit and a non-profit group, and guiltily drive an electric vehicle that we try. I mean, we bought Leafs, we bought Bolts, we bought Volts. When we did the math, $35,000 Model 3 makes a lot of sense. The Tesla truck, for how bulletproof it is for an actual get work done vehicle, I don't know if I should talk about this too much. We're probably going to open something of a construction company in the next 2 to 3 years.
Yeah.
And when we did the math on running the Cybertruck at its current specs versus giving contractors regular trucks, it wasn't anywhere close. I mean, you were saving thousands of dollars per vehicle per year. So I really love what it can do. We had a long discussion on whether or not we could do that. Again, we're a community nonprofit. It's hard to have that image rolling up in the Cybertruck, but it turns out that you can wrap the entire truck for about $2,000, and so there's actually several designs where we have a cyber flower truck or different images that will be the outside of the vehicle, because the reality is it is the most economically intelligent decision if you have something that needs to pull 10,000 pounds around. Yeah. It's a great vehicle that happens to be very, very aggressive, which I'm sure we'll all like until.
Yeah, hunters love it or hate it.
I ordered one, but I'm also the geek maybe in that. So I love the exoskeleton idea. That was by itself like what? Whoa, this is so cool! I gotta have one. But it won't fit into my garage. When we built the house, we designed the garage doors for Prius with. And so I won't be able to fit it, so I'll probably end up canceling out of it, but I felt really good about myself.
It's interesting you talk about the exoskeleton, because I was listening to a industry expert who talked about that. It's not a new concept. It had actually been around, and it is the cheapest way to manufacture something, and they knew it, and they actually designed it at some other manufacturers, but the marketing departments came back and said, no, we can't do that. So it's kind of fascinating that. So I think we're getting close on time. Chris, do we have any? Do you have anything to? Do you have any questions for our great guests here?
I'm going to defer to Spencer. I think he's been fielding thousands of questions.
Spencer, do you have any?
Well, I just want to say, I just figured this out too, but you're two of my favorite thinkers on urbanism and clean air, and it's really been a thrill for me to listen in because whenever I run into you at events or things, I go back to my table and I say, these are two of my favorite thinkers, and I just want to follow them around. I know. I want to say thank you so much for what you're doing in our community because it takes this kind of leadership to push things to the next level, and we're starting to see people in our community pay attention that we don't have to do things the way we've always done them, and there is a business case to be made. So I love what you've done.
Yeah.
Do you know, James, I think one more topic that I think is really interesting that most people don't think about when you think of electricity being used, that has to do with the network and the intelligence of all the devices interacting with one another. There's no natural gas supply chain, there's no gasoline or diesel-based supply chain or operating or mode of operating that will come close. And that is where I think the network or the platform always wins. And electricity is a platform that can connect all the different interacting devices. And I think that very fact that you can have an electric car communicating to your power wall communicating to your solar panels, communicating to your power plants, communicating to
your refrigerator,
to all the other devices, that and then creating value out of that ecosystem. That is where I think electricity has already won. And then, Chris, I think you said something interesting. As you go to renewable, cost will come down. Sharing economy, renewable economy, all of this, the cost is going to come down. And then the variable cost per unit, whether that is the mile driven or the hour of time spent in an apartment complex, whatever your guys' metric is, over the lifetime of the building, for instance, the cost is going to come down.
Sure.
And you can compete. I don't know what these other companies are thinking that believe that they can compete, and I think the chess game is already won.
Well, it's electrification is the solution for climate change. I mean, it is, and so it's more about how do we get there. There might be some bridging strategies and bridging technology that we have to rely on, but ultimately, it's how we get to zero emissions. Right?
And I think in that context, I want to say hats off to how you guys have sort of transformed your organization also to actually embrace the change.
Yeah,
that is not easy. I mean,
no. When
I
I first started, it was interesting. I remember attending a conference, and one of our senior executives was not embracing so much of the new future, but the current management, I do have to say, gets it and is definitely forward thinking and wants to find a solution. So, and a lot of it is it's economics too, So it's a lot of that has shifted as well. So.
And then stickiness. I think stickiness is if we stop using gasoline, there's nothing that keeps us attached to it. But once you have these devices that all talk to one another, that all interact, you don't want to walk away. So stickiness of the supply chain, I think that's going to be something that will work in your favor also. So,
Mr. Parker, give you the last word.
Well, I
thank you again for hosting us. This has been such a fantastic
in almost 100-year-old building that still found a way to be electric.
That was right on that conquistador.
No, it's the truth. I really admire the work you guys do, not just from how you do it, but also the net effects of that over time. From a little bit different perspective, from ecologically, if you're trying to make a future which has a deep divergence between people who are making a lot of money and people who are getting left behind by that economic largesse, and you have a carbon-based or a fossil fuel-based future, I don't have an equation for you where the same quality of lifestyle can get cheaper over time. So apart from it being, perceptually the best thing to do economically, where that writing is on the wall for hundreds of people that live in this building is that wages, I don't have to find a magic pill where everyone's wages go up for quality of life to go up. And unless people are not just told, but really shown how you go from the current economy, which has a lot of expenses everywhere that haven't really been optimized, to one where, hey, look, I don't have to try to make the current economy do different than what it is right now. I can tell you your quality of life is going to increase in 10 years. You don't get there without electrification. So apart from simply being the business or the intelligent business thing to do, or apart from it being the ecologically right thing to do, I think from a societal egalitarian point of view, true electrification is the way that low and moderate income people's lives are better in the long term, and I don't know another way you could get it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think on that note, call it a wrap. So thank you so much for joining us. And for those of you that are, hopefully you'll join us next week, next Friday at 3 o'clock. We're going to have another great topic. We're going to talk about urban mobility. And we're going to kind of expand some of these concepts that we introduced on some of the TNC or transportation network companies and electric buses. So that should be a good episode as well. But on behalf of our guests, our host here at the Give Group, and with Pack Size with Honko, I'm James Campbell. Thank you for joining us, and I'll see you next week.